Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I've taken as my centerpiece the new moon in Gemini, which takes place on the 6th of June at 1339 BST or 1239 UTC. You can make the adjustment either way. And although, new moons, full moons, they happen every month, they just sort of give our life astrological texture, for want of a better phrase. New moons, new beginnings, waxing moons, things growing. And when we come to a full moon, it's like completion. We're closing a cycle. We're in the waning cycle and things are winding down. And it's a nice way to kind of look at life, to build it into the routine of our busy lives. But, not all new moons are terribly important, and not all full moons are terribly important. I think what is probably relevant at this stage is the fact that we are definitely in the time of Gemini. We have so many planetary influences in this air sign that it's certainly worth talking about, especially as this particular time, this particular year, there are some very, very important connections coming up between all these Gemini planets and Saturn on the one hand and Neptune on the other. And we've got a few other things as well. But just before we get to really look at the context of what's going on at this time, I want to really sort of talk about the fact that this particular new moon, and I just mentioned the idea that new moons are always about new beginnings. Well, this new moon is angling Saturn, the planet of time, the planet of hard times in some ways, certainly effort. So with a new moon angling Saturn, squaring in fact, we've got this idea that new beginnings are coming out of hard times. And I think if you can play around with that theme, you won't be going far wrong. But what do we associate Gemini with, and the third solar house of the horoscope? Well, it's all about communication. It's about travel. It's about movement. It's about the exchange of ideas. It's about trade. It's about things that we put out there, exchange with others, and receive something in return in the sense of a back and to. So this is why sometimes we get all caught up in knots when Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, goes retrograde, because everything suddenly develops glitches and we go into a giant go slow. Well, fortunately, Mercury is not retrograde in this Gemini season. And we have a really strong emphasis on transport, transportation, travel, things like that. That's just in general. So we may get some kind of new developments along those kind of lines. But also with the connection to Saturn, there are also things that we might look at that are going to be more complicated, because maybe there are strikes, maybe there are protests slowing down things that should be going at speed. We have to build in that idea that Saturn creates boundaries, it creates obstacles sometimes, often for our own good. But I think this, looking at the overall picture for this part of June, and we're going to start really 1st of June, going right through to about the 15th, 16th of June, this particular fortnight really is dominated by Saturn on the one hand and Neptune on the other. So without more ado, let's take a look at the chart, and so we can see a little bit more clearly what's going on. Now you'll see from this particular chart, which I've set for London, and there's a reason I set it for London. It's because we have just had a general election announced, and during the course of this new moon until the next new moon, this is the time that's going to cover the whole of the election process, and it looks extremely interesting. Incidentally, the day after the general election, which is going to happen on the 4th of July, we get a new moon. And so we really have a very, very clear indication that there are new things are coming here. We're not with the same old, same old. And by the time I take a little bit of a closer view at that, you'll see it is really all change. So taking a look at our new moon up there around about the 1 o'clock time on our clock face, we can see at 16 degrees of Gemini. We can also see that Venus is at 16 degrees of Gemini. So we've got a Sun, Moon, Venus cluster. That means around the time of the 6th, so a few days before and a few days after, there are really a lot of nice vibes. I really don't like that kind of slang, but it's quite good when we look at Venus and we think about happy times, pleasure, love, all those kind of things, caught up in that nice little cluster with the sun and the moon. It sort of bodes good times. However, yes, there, you've seen it. I've even got a line drawn between the moon, Venus, and the sun and Saturn. Now, I've talked about new things coming out of hard times, a new start, a new cycle. But I think what I want to say about this as well is that on the weekend that follows the new moon, we're talking about the 8th and 9th of June, this is a season for weddings. Lots of people are getting married or holding, happy celebrations at this time. And before you think, well, what does that bode when we look at Saturn in the mix, which is this rather hard taskmaster of the planetary troupe? Well, in point of fact, it can be extremely good for weddings. And the reason being that although weddings are fun events and romantic and all the sorts of things we want to think of about true love and weddings, it is nonetheless a formal legal agreement between two people in the pursuit of a lifelong marriage. Now, what do you need in that situation? You need Saturn. So that's an important component of things you may be doing at this time. Even if you're not getting married, you might be doing something else that you want to be durable, that has a legal aspect to it. And I think this Saturn bodes very well for longevity and durability, being able to endure all seasons, in fact. Now, as we go forward in time from that new moon, the first thing we come to really is the Mars-Pluto square. And if you look at the chart here, you can see Mars in the 2 o'clock position at 28 degrees of Aries. And then we can look down towards the 5 o'clock position and find Pluto at 1 degree Aquarius, 50 minutes. Now, in fact, that is a 90-degree aspect. Mars coming to the end of Aries, and it'll be in Taurus in no time at all. So we have a Mars-Pluto square. And I have to say, this Mars-Pluto square will be dominating the period that this new moon will cover. On the 1st of June, we have Jupiter trine Pluto, and I talked about this on my previous video, the full moon video, because although we think of Jupiter and Pluto as being in both in air signs an angle of harmony, they're still two planets that can pack a very, very powerful punch. And so things that are being unearthed at this time, we think about Pluto and the underground and think the underworld, things that have been buried for a long time. When you get Jupiter angling that, you get huge kind of eruptions, and things that are being buried and brought out into the light tend to be quite scandalous, or they have a really, really big effect. So think about these things in light of the things that are happening at this particular time. But a Mars-Pluto square is not a fun aspect. Always, with any combination of astrological planetary factors, we get things that are positive and things that are negative. But whenever we're dealing with these outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, and also the slower moving planets, Saturn and Jupiter, they're much more difficult to manage. We don't have as much control over them. So with Mars, the planet of action, of drive, desire, conflict, angling Pluto, again, that theme of things coming out from the underworld and things being quite violent in the sense of eruptions and those kind of things, we can see that there's an awful lot of things happening at this time that are going to be quite difficult to manage and difficult to accept. used well, we can get through a lot of stuff on that Mars-Pluto aspect. We can clear the decks. We can get rid of things that are toxic. We can cleanse. We can create space. All those good things we should be thinking of and applying during this the period covered by this particular video. But also we must be aware that things can get violent very easily, so we don't want to get into an argument with people. And if we're going to places where there are a lot of crowds, a lot of people gathered, things can just turn very quickly. And so, give people space and allow yourself to have breathing space. That is certainly something I'll be looking at this particular point. So I'm going to leave this chart for a minute so that you can perhaps keep it in your mind if you're good at doing that thing. And I want to really talk about how these particular influences might affect the things going on at the time. And on the 15th of June, King Charles celebrates his official birthday. He's given an official birthday. And is that greedy? Who has two birthdays? Oh, well, the king has two birthdays. But this is celebrated by the trooping of the color on the 15th of June. Now, that particular time, the sun, Venus, and Mercury will all be coming up to a square angle to Neptune. So there is a lot of mystery at this particular point. One of the things that we have to think about, and I so often when I work with Neptune and living in England for the main part, it's a rainy country. We have a lot of rain. We have a lot of mist and murk, even in the nicest parts of the year. So we might look at this trooping of the color, the celebration of the king's official birthday, and see, my goodness, what a lot of Neptune here. And it might just simply mean it's a soggy day. But that Neptune, and I'm going to show you by looking at King Charles's chart here, which I'm going to put up right now, we can see the way I've drawn it, Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces is intersecting his Jupiter-Uranus opposition. So we know this is now having a more personal effect. This particular trooping of the color and the day it's in is going to fan a lot of speculation. Whatever conspiracy theories might already have going or doing the rounds, they're going to be super intense at this time. Now, we might also see there are missing things at this trooping of the color. What is missing? Maybe people are missing. People we might expect to be there aren't there. Things are going to get lost. Things are going to get delayed. And maybe there will be occurrences that make people read more into events than really meets the eye. Let's not forget that Neptune is the master of deception. So coming away from that, let's look at another very important character who, of course, I mentioned a little while ago. And on my full moon video, we talked about Donald Trump because at that particular time, the case, the hush money case was drawing to an end. Well, I am recording this video on the 27th of May, Monday, the 27th of May. And the closing arguments, the summations, are set to happen the following day, Tuesday, the 28th. So there may already be some kind of result by the time this video comes out, or not. But certainly I was tempted to look at Donald Trump's solar return, that's his birthday chart, because in this section of time, Donald Trump celebrates his 78th birthday. Now, I'm going to put this chart up right now. We can see the solar return chart on the screen. And I want to say a few words about solar returns. These are not always the most reliable source of forecasting. Now, I know a lot of people might argue with that and swear by them, but I've been an astrologer for 40 years. I've looked at a lot of solar return charts. Sometimes they are absolutely spot on, so accurate you think, my goodness, isn't astrology fabulous? But on other occasions, they don't come up to the mark. And you've got to bear that in mind. There is no absolute way a solar return is right. Normally, I set my solar returns up for the place where people are when they celebrate their birthday. And I'm sure that Donald Trump will be in the New York area at this time, which is why I've set it for New York. Plus, he was born in New York. He was born in Jamaica. Now you'll see this chart is very interesting. Again, I've drawn your eyes to why it's interesting. The solar return is about the sun. It is the sun's return to its natal position on your birthday. And the moment that happens, we set up a chart and have a look at what the portents are for the year ahead. So here we have Donald Trump with the sun, Venus, and Mercury, all in the 12th house of the horoscope. So we know 12th house matters are going to be significant, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But we're also seeing here a very interesting configuration, flanking the midheaven, Saturn on the one hand, Neptune on the other. Neptune is squaring Venus and the sun and Mercury, and Saturn is opposing the moon. So we've got what we call a mutable T-square, an angle of tension. When we have Saturn and Neptune bracketing the midheaven like this, what we're looking at is loss of face, at least. What we're looking at is hard times. We are looking at some kind of loss and struggle. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that Donald Trump will lose the case, but it looks like it, given that around this time we are going to get a verdict and maybe even a sentence, although sentencing can take a little bit longer than the actual verdict. But we need to take into consideration the Sun, Venus, and Mercury in the 12th house. The 12th house in traditional astrology, the house of incarceration, but in modern astrology, we're talking more about retreat. And let's focus on that rather than the idea of incarceration being imprinted in this chart, and think about the things that are happening around the time of his birthday. Then we're going to see a retreat of some description. And that can be a time in rest, a time away from the crowds. But of course, we know Donald Trump is busy campaigning in an effort to win the election and actually win the Republican nomination. But look at that Saturn and Neptune on that midheaven, Saturn opposing the moon. You know, this particular chart is going to be there for an entire year. So the prospects for his winning the election are compromised. Let's leave it at that. But I think if you're a follower of astrology and you can follow me and my guidance, my interpretation, there is no way you can convert this pattern into a success story. And let's not forget that Uranus, which is in the 11 o'clock position on this chart, 24 degrees of Taurus, is on his natal midheaven. And I talked about that in my last video, meaning a change of job. So we've got lots of change in circumstances, and we can see a sort of retirement here. And I just want to leave it at that. Now, the other thing that I've mentioned is the British election. And I'll probably get into that a little bit nearer the time of the election, but I just want to pull up two things that I think are interesting here. This chart that I'm showing you is the chart of the Conservative Party. And, you know, we don't get an exact time. And in fact, there's another chart with the Conservative Party when the Tamworth Manifesto was created, which is considered to be another aspect of the birth of the Conservative Party. But I'm going to stick with this one and go into my memory bank here. It has to do with Disraeli and the national, he put together some principles that form the pillars of the Conservative Party. And this particular chart really has proved very valid over the years. And to give you some idea why, if we go back to 1979, the election of 1979, which brought Mrs. Thatcher into power, Uranus, the planet of change, of controversy, if you like, was on the sun at that particular point, and of course, heading towards the midheaven and Saturn as well. And guess what? As we come to this election on July the 4th, where is Uranus? But on the moon at the opposite point. Now, I think you don't need to be an astrologer of years standing to figure out that this means a change of home. The moon, where is the home party? Well, I'm afraid that there is a move in sight. So I don't think looking at just these kind of just quick snapshot view of what's in store bodes well for the Tory party. I have to say, and I'm not going to do anything about that in this particular video, that's not looking that great for the Labour Party either. So to wrap up, this is one of my shorter videos. I'm aiming not to take forever and a day to go through things. But of course, it's always important to reflect on what this passage of time means. It is complicated. I've talked about travel, communication, dialogue, and debate. I've talked about conflict because of that Mars-Pluto square. I've talked about mysteries, deepening mysteries, conspiracy theories, all sorts of things that are taking us away from the reality of what may be happening. These are coloring this period of time. So for all of us, living in this complex time, I think often the only thing we can control are our lives in a way and our actions. So although we want to look at this bigger picture and to see what's happening in the world and what may or may not affect us going forward, we want to remember that in our little world, our little universe, we have control. And the thing we have control about is our own actions. And I think it will be important at this time to be cautious with our actions, to reflect on things, to research and think what is real, what is not, so that our actions are based on truth. They're coming from a place of truth, if you like. And that's the best we can do. But if we all do that, what a change for the better that can be. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again on my next video. Bye for now.